Terrified of heights. Really need to look over this railing. Watch your step. Welcome aboard the RMS Queen Mary. We'll be your guide for your Haunted Encounters tour. We are told to us by passengers and crew. Whether or not you believe in the paranormal, I am going to give you just enough history. Queen Mary was owned and operated by the Cunard Line. She made her maiden voyage May 27, 1936. Her route was between Southampton, England, and New York City. At the time, she was the largest and fastest ship ever built. Over 81,000 gross tons, capable of speeds up to 32 knots, about 35 miles per hour. With the outbreak of the Second World War, Queen Mary was drafted into service as a troop transport. She would bring soldiers from the United States to Great Britain, wounded soldiers and prisoners of war from Great Britain back to the United States. On one occasion, 1,000 people in one crossing. World War became so important that Hitler offered $250,000 to any of his German U-boat captains that would sink her. After the war, she continued passenger service for another 20 years before being retired in 1967. The Queen Mary was put up for auction. The city of Long Beach was the highest bidder at just under $3.5. December 9th will be the 56th anniversary of her arrival in Long Beach. History. There have been 58 confirmed deaths on board. But the reason that I say confirmed, because anytime there's a war involved, a lot of information always ends up classified. But we do have records of people passing away from illness, old age, accidents. Sometimes our guests or crew believe they have seen the deceased walking the decks of our ship. Our first ghost story is about the Mauretania Room. When the Queen Mary was in service, this was the tourist class main lounge, also known as the Garden Lounge or the Wicker Lounge because of all the wicker furniture that used to be in here. Since the ship came to Long Beach, it is now held over for smaller, private events. In 1989, there were some housekeepers who came in to set up for one such event. They came across a lady in a lovely evening gown that they simply described as old-fashioned, sitting in a wicker chair in the middle of the dance floor. She wasn't hurting anything, they just went about their business. A few moments later, their boss, the head housekeeper, walked in and asked about the lady in the evening gown. They told her, "We don't know what she wants." The head housekeeper went to find the time, but she didn't speak or move at all. So finally, the housekeeper threatened to call security. While she was on the phone, the lady in the evening gown stood up, looked around the room, even smiled, and then both the lady and the wicker chair disappeared. All three women claimed to have seen the same thing. This apparition lasted for almost 10 minutes. We have a record. Well, folks, as we're moving, we are a decent-sized group. Try to stay close together. How many of you wandering off? If you have cameras, we encourage you.
Not sure. Oh, there's go. What's this one?
After I finish telling the Mauretania story, I'll get asked one of two questions. Either, do we know who the woman was, or do we know how the woman died? We don't know who she was. We actually don't believe that she did die. What I was describing in there, and what I'm about to describe out here, is what parapsychologists or professional ghost hunters call a residual haunting. What you see in Hollywood are conscious hauntings, where it is clearly the spirit of a dead person messing with the living. In the case of a residual haunting, the idea is that we are all energy. As you travel through time and space, you leave that energy behind, kind of like a footprint. Think of it as the ship showing you its memories. At one point, a woman was hanging out in the Mauretania Room. The ship recorded that and plays it on a loop. Same out here. A while back, one of our engineers, Rube, was walking along main deck. He was on his cell phone like a good employee. He noticed some kind of movement ahead of him. He looked up from his phone. He saw a young boy he guessed to be around 10 years old walking towards him. He thought that was strange because he was working the graveyard shift. It was 2 a.m. and there were no other adults around. Arube stopped walking. The little boy kept coming closer to him. He told us once the kid was close enough, he was planning on asking him what he was doing out of bed. But the words caught in his throat when he realized he could see through the boy to the wall on the other side. Right this way.
Years at sea, she catered to thousands of passengers, but some were more prolific than others. One of the most prolific passengers to sail on the Queen Mary was Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain during World War II. He sailed on the ship 6 times, 3 times during the war, 3 times afterwards with his wife. Whenever he was on board during World War II, he had his own private suite, and all the rooms around that became his war offices. We now have a designated Churchill suite. M119 on the starboard side is believed to be the room he stayed in. It was also the most requested hotel room on board. A lot of the guests who are staying there tell us at random times they will smell cigar smoke. Now, if you don't know anything about Winston Churchill, he was notorious for being a very heavy drinker and smoker. So parapsychologists believe that the smell of cigar smoke is Churchill's essence, lingering in the room even half a century after he occupied it. That led to a story of a housekeeper following the smell of cigar smoke right up to the door of the Churchill suite. She knocked several times, no answer, finally just keyed herself in. She said she came across a portly gentleman sitting in a chair smoking a cigar. When she informed him, "Sir, there is no smoking allowed on the ship," he dissolved into a portrait above the chair, which just so happens to be of Winston Churchill. Folks, we're just going to continue down one deck. But as we do, we will be passing what I consider to be the most terrifying room on board, the gym. Watch your step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Guests were standing in the hotel lobby. The front desk used to be the purser's desk. The purser, kind of like a concierge at a hotel, he was in charge of the maids, the stewards, organizing social activities on board. The portside shop was the bank. The starboard lounge was the doctor's office. Both sides could be used for the first-class passengers to board the ship. Here on the starboard side, they've replaced the steel hatches with windows, so you now have a fantastic view of downtown Long Beach. You have to be a fan of Dexter or CSI Miami, downtown Miami. There was a mother and daughter exploring the ship late one night. They decided to take a break here in the starboard lounge. They were sitting in the chairs, chatting, nobody else was around. They claimed that they could hear a soft melody coming from this original piano. They were not the first or last people to make that claim. A lot of our hotel guests who were on a late night expedition trying to find an ice machine have wandered by and told us they've seen the bench shift on its own. And then they will also hear a soft melody. We don't know who the ghost pianist is. Well, my money's on Liberace. The music is thought to accompany a ghost that we call the Lady in White. Some believe she was a war bride. Right after World War II ended, Queen Mary's new job was to bring all of the American GIs' sweethearts from the United Kingdom to the United States. The catch was, the only way that these ladies got off the ship and stayed in the States was if their soldier came to claim them. It's believed that the Lady in White was a war bride who was never claimed. No one I've ever talked about it seems to think that she died on board. So parapsychologists believe that the devastation of being left behind trapped her spirit here. Whatever the reason, wherever this piano goes, and it's had a few different homes throughout the ship, people tell us they see the Lady in White in a wedding dress, dancing alone, as if she's waiting for a new partner. So folks, you want to take some photos of the piano or check out the Starboard Lounge, do not sit at the bench or play the piano, as they are both almost 90 years old and a little fragile. I'll be waiting at the column. If you ever choose to stay on board this ship, or any place that's supposed to be haunted, keep in mind, you run the risk of having your own haunted encounter. That's exactly what happened to a pilot in one of the rooms towards the front of ADAC in 1993. He was staying on board during a brief layover. He decided to turn in early because he had an early flight. He got snuggled down into his bed when he heard a crash in the bathroom, but he decided, too tired to deal with that now, I'll check it out in the morning. He turned over to go to sleep and saw a man in a 1930s style suit sitting at the desk going over some papers. The two of them caught eyes. The man in the suit disappeared. So the pilot's natural reaction was to pull the covers over his head and go to sleep. He got the next morning to investigate what the crash had been in the bathroom. He found that the ghost had dumped the contents of his toiletry bag into the sink and had started the bag into the tub. How would it know?
That was his scene.
Working here, a couple of housekeepers told me that this ladies' room was haunted by a ship's officer. In this man's defense, when the Queen Mary was in service, these restrooms were the other way around. So as far as the officer is concerned, ladies, you just walked into the men's room. But who is the ship's officer? Some believe this was an incident in 1949. Second Officer William Stark was invited to the staff captain's quarters, along with a few other officers of the watch, for a pre-dinner drink. Stark got there first. He asked the steward for some gin. The steward presented Stark with a bottle that he found in a footlocker he thought looked like a gin bottle. Stark poured himself a drink, shot it back, and realized immediately it wasn't gin. The other officers arrived. Stark just kind of laughed it off, saying, "I do believe I've just poisoned myself." He had. That gin bottle contained carbon tetrachloride, an industrial cleaning solution. He died 3 days later. There are the housekeepers who believe he haunts the ladies' room, but he is far more often reported being seen up in the officers' quarters or simply roaming the decks of the ship. If you pass someone who is dressed similar to the way I am, but he appears to be a little more transparent, that's Officer Stark. Moving forward. I'm gonna let you out. I don't want to tell the story out there just because I know the wind is gonna take my voice, and I still have to do this 2 more times today. But the reason we're approaching the bow is because it was the site of an horrific accident during World War II. As I mentioned earlier, the Queen Mary was the fastest ship in her day. Nothing on the water could keep up with her. So when she was bringing the soldiers back and forth across the Atlantic, she was mostly on her own. There would be a small military escort of destroyers and cruisers to see her a few miles out of New York just until she got to full speed. A second military escort would be waiting off the coast of Ireland to bring her safely into Scotland as she slowed down. But for the 5 days in between, she had to rely on her speed and a zigzag cruising pattern. The zigzag was to avoid torpedoes. There was no such thing as missile lock in the 1940s. You want to fire a torpedo, you had to line up your shot, shoot, and hope whatever you're shooting at doesn't move, because the torpedo only went one way. So to avoid being sunk, the Queen Mary would change direction every couple of minutes. October 2nd, 1942, off the coast of Northern Ireland, there was a collision between the Queen Mary and one of her escorts, the HMS Curacao. The HMS Curacao was a 4,000-ton cruiser. The Queen Mary, an 81,000-ton ocean liner. The Curacao drifted in front of the Queen Mary. The Queen Mary cut the Curacao in half. In less than a minute, Both halves were engulfed in flames. 5 minutes after that, the Curacao was lost beneath the Atlantic Ocean. There's nothing anyone on board the Queen Mary could do to help, for two reasons. First, the captain was under strict orders not to stop until all of his charges arrived safely at their final destination. At the time, there was about 10,000 soldiers on board, far too many lives at stake. The other reason is, to come to a complete stop would take the Queen Mary 10 miles. There were 101 survivors. They were rescued by other members of the military escort. But we get reports from our engineering crew and our security staff that late at night, or sometimes even if it's just quiet enough, they can hear the twisting of metal, the rushing of water, or frantic shouting like something's gone horribly wrong. Parapsychologists believe that is the 338 sailors who went down with the Curacao, reliving the accident over and over again. So the bow is probably the most concentrated area of paranormal energy. Now folks, don't wander too much, but you do have some very nice backdrops of the harbor and the front of the ship if you want to take pictures. When you're ready, you come back inside. We're going to regroup right here at the fire station. Watch your...
Oh, okay.
This is also not where it belongs. It should be at the bottom of the ship. There were a lot of safety lessons taken from the Titanic when the Queen Mary was built. First and foremost, they extended the bulkheads or walls all the way to the ceiling. They also increased the number of watertight hatches. In Queen Mary's case, she had 38 hydraulic hatches. In the event of a hull breach or a fire, these hatches, which were remotely controlled from the wheelhouse, would slam shut with 700 pounds of hydraulic pressure in less than a minute. An alarm would sound. It would take about 35 seconds for the pressure to build, and then, depending on the size of the hatch, it would slide closed in 6 to 12 seconds. Working in the machine areas could get monotonous. If it was smooth sailing, meaning no real issues to tend to, the engineers pretty much just stood around waiting for their shift to end. So during fire drills, they invented a game called chicken. Once they heard the alarm, they would start to jump from one side to the other, see how many times they can make it through before the hatch slams shut. 1966, on a very foggy day in July, just as a precaution, the captain ordered all the hatches closed. Up the bridge, they watched all the little indicator lights come on, except for one. The engineers made their way down into the aft engine room and discovered an 18-year-old fireman crushed in hatch 13. They got him out, they took him to the infirmary. He was pronounced dead shortly thereafter. We now get reports. People will see a young man in coveralls who simply fades from view. We have reports of disembodied whistling, and women will complain that they felt somebody pull their hair. There's a theory why the engineer will specifically target women. In the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, possibly even the 70s, women were not allowed in machine areas on a ship. You did not go into the engine room. You definitely didn't go in the boiler rooms. So the engineer's pulling your hair to say, hey, you don't belong here. Nobody knows for sure how he got caught in the hatch, because he was down there by himself. There are those who insist he was playing chicken, but there are others who think he was just coming back for a tool that he had dropped and he misjudged the timing of the door. Because we also get reports of people hearing him whisper, have you seen my wrench? So folks, we got to take some photos of the hatch, or pose with the hatch, during in the boiler rooms or with the luggage, anything silly like that. There's only first, cabin, and tourist class. The way Cunard ships were broken up was not by deck, but by the smoothness of the ride. First class was the center of the ship because that was the smoothest ride. Cabin class was the stern, the back of the ship. They had to deal with engine vibrations. Tourist class was the bow, the forward end, by far the roughest ride as the Queen Mary bounced across the waves. So the tourist class staircase had two major design flaws. It is at a really high angle, and it is facing towards the bow. That became a problem when the Queen Mary hit rough water and started to climb a large wave, because then the angle of the stairs goes from 45 to 90 degrees. There are a number of documented cases of tourist class passengers being tossed off of this staircase, One really vague report in the 1950s simply says, gentleman found collapsed on forward stairs. So we don't know for sure what happened, but it is not at all unreasonable to suspect he may have been thrown against the wall and died from his injuries. We now have the Man in Black. And I don't mean Johnny Cash is haunting the ship. My understanding is that this is just a shadow that will ascend the stairs, turn the corner, and disappear. Careful down the deadly staircase. Any of the Ghost Hunter type shows that feature the Queen Mary, you may have already heard about room B340, which is supposed to be the most haunted room on the ship. We're going to pass it in just a moment. It is the very first room on the port side of B deck. It is not marked in any way. As soon as the ghost shows made B340 famous, people started breaking into it and stealing things. Their favorite thing to steal was the nameplates that said B340, so we stopped replacing them. The first ghost story about that room came from the 1960s. A passenger woke up in the middle of the night. She claimed that she felt someone repeatedly pulling the sheets off of her. At first she thought the sheets had just fallen off, so she pulled them back up. They got pulled back down. She pulled them back up. They got pulled back down. A full-on tug-of-war ensued before she remembered she was in the room by herself. She looked up, she saw the silhouette of a man standing at the foot of her bed. She screamed, the man disappeared. Her scream got the full attention of the night steward, who ran up the hall into her room. Once she calmed down enough to explain what had happened, the steward explained that when he passed her room, he didn't see anybody go in, and he didn't pass anybody in the hall on his way back. Jump forward to the 1980s. The whole space was a standard hotel room. A housekeeper went in to change the linens. She stepped out to get some towels for the bathroom. And when she went back in, she found the sheets on the bed that she had just made in a pile in the middle of the floor. All of the activity in B340 is attributed to a death reported in 1950. Everyone already disembarked. The staff captain was making his rounds. He discovered the passenger had passed away in his bed. Cause of death, unknown. Whoever this gentleman was, we just call him Walter, he's the ghost that's believed to haunt B340. The room was discontinued for renting because of the constant complaints from hotel guests. They wake up to see the lights in the bathroom turning on and off by themselves. Guests would leave the room, come back, all the water fixtures would be running. Or they would hear a knock at the door, open it, and of course, there's nobody there. So finally, the hotel said, enough, and they shut it down. There was talk for years afterwards of restoring B340 and renting it out as the Haunted Room. So in 2018, it became a mini suite that went for about $1,000 a night. The first non-promotional guests to stay in that room kept calling the front desk to say, okay, we get it. You can turn off the special effects now. We just want to go to sleep. The attendant had to keep telling these people, there are no special effects. We just remodeled the room. They left abruptly at 2 o'clock in the morning, so I'm guessing they had a good time.
Probably not for $1,000 a night,
Direct your attention to the Bakelite handrails, Bakelite being one of the earliest forms of plastic. When the Queen Mary was first being built, the arrogance of man won out. They decided they had made the ship so big, she would have no trouble with the waves of the Atlantic Ocean, and initially, she was built without handrails. At the end of their first Atlantic storm in October of 1936, there were a dozen ambulances waiting in New York to pick up the severely injured passengers. After that, they installed 10 miles of brand new Bakelite handrails. When the ship did inevitably pitch and roll, just hold on for dear life. I told you that story to tell you this story. In 2004, there was a family exploring the ship. They couldn't shake the feeling somebody was following them, even though they were the only people in the hall at the time. They finally stopped moving to feel it out. Was there really a presence nearby? A moment later, The grandmother shrieked and almost fell over. She said she saw a woman float by her and disappear through the wall. Those two stories are not necessarily related, because there's a theory you don't have to die someplace to haunt it. Parapsychologists believe that instead of ascending to a higher plane of existence, some spirits may choose to return to an area where they had some of their fondest memories. So the woman who disappeared through the wall may not have been a casualty of the storm, but rather a happy ghost returning to her old stateroom. I want to know. The heights of technology when she first set sail. The elevators are original. The controls have been updated, but other than that, they're original. They were all built exactly the same way. All the parts are interchangeable. The only reason we have two that kind of work is because we keep taking parts from all the other original elevators. I think it was 2015. One of my former crewmates, Sabria, was wrapping up her day. She wasn't really paying attention. She had her hands filled with paperwork. She ran into the elevator, pressed the button to whatever deck she was going to. The doors closed. The interior doors are very reflective. She said as soon as they shut, she saw the reflection of a lady in a blue dress standing behind her. When she turned around to say, "I'm sorry, I didn't realize there was somebody else in here," there wasn't anybody else in there. She turned back, the doors opened, and she felt a breeze blow out past her. On a completely unrelated note, Human Resources told us that on average, 10 people a year would quit due to the hauntings. Last time, watch your step. Powell Dispensary. A steward would stand behind this desk and would towels you head into the first class swimming pool. We now put up this nice little corkboard so you can have a nice photograph taken at before the maiden voyage during the Queen Mary speed trials. In this photograph, you'll see that the pool originally had two diving boards, one on either side of the slide. Those were taken out within the first 3 months of the Queen Mary service, when they discovered that if you try to use a diving board on a moving ship, you may not come down where you think you're coming down. The ceiling is quartz, and of course she is a ship. She's always floating on water. I've been told those two things are conductors for the paranormal. So directly below me in the old changing rooms, parapsychologists believe that the quartz and the water formed a vortex, a whirlpool of energy that allows the spirits to travel from the other side back into the land of the living, and they think that's why there's so much paranormal activity on board. This was the original entrance to the first class swimming pool. We have not been able to use it as a pool since the ship came along. California State Code dictates pools cannot be deeper than 3.5 feet at the shallow end. The first and cabin class pools were both 6 feet at the shallow end. The cabin class pool was removed and turned into the Royal Theater. The first class pool became a centerpiece for all of our ghost-related material. So that's not water in the pool. It's a ripple projector intended to make it look creepy. The first class pool ended up doubling as the tourist class pool from the late 1950s until the end of the Queen Mary's run in '67. For the longest time, tourist class passengers didn't have anywhere to swim. So after years of complaints, the Cunard Line decided to make a concession. While the first class passengers were at key, they would allow the tourist class passengers to use the first class pool. The moment they were done, the pool was drained, cleaned, and refilled for the first class passengers. The 24,000 gallon capacity could be drained or filled in about 25 minutes. It was salt water pumped in from the Atlantic Ocean, which you would think would be freezing, but you have to consider the location of the pool. It is sitting directly above the boiler rooms. The boiler rooms could get up to 115 degrees, which made the water very pleasant. Probably our most infamous spirit is believed to haunt the first class pool. A little girl that everyone refers to as Jackie. Somewhere around 7 years old, she's always described as a little girl in a sailor dress with blonde hair that a lot of people think was a cabin class passenger who drowned in the cabin class pool. Thinking there is that when that pool was converted to the theater, she upgraded herself to the first class pool. The problem with that theory is there is no record of anyone ever drowning on this ship. So it's far more likely Jackie is just one of our happy ghosts. Maybe this is where she learned how to swim or how to dive. Maybe it's just her favorite childhood vacation. She has chosen the pool as her permanent residence. She's definitely a conscious haunting, not a residual haunting. I'm just basing that on all the interactions that she has had with our guests. People will tell us they saw Jackie popping her head around the columns or up over the railings, kind of like she's playing peekaboo or hide and seek. We had a few reports of little wet footprints coming out of the pool, walking along the deck. Some of the guests told me they thought they felt a cold little hand take hold of theirs. But the most consistent and frequent report that we get anywhere on the ship is the sound of a little girl singing nursery rhymes in this area. She is a very playful spirit. Now, I'm not sure if you noticed the gigantic dome at the back of our property, but that was built specifically to house the Spruce Goose, our Houston big wooden plane. That left in 1993. It was taken to an Air and Space Museum in Oregon, so for a while, there was just a gigantic empty dome that occasionally got used as a soundstage. Batman and Robin with George Clooney, I was told that was the Batcave. Pirates of the Caribbean, every time they went to Tortuga, that was Tortuga. And now Carnival Cruise Lines is taking over for the check-in. Right before the Spruce Goose left, we had a report from a security guard who said he was doing his midnight rounds. He entered the hangar and he saw a little girl in a sailor dress walking along the wing. Well, he yelled up to her, "Kid, what are you doing?" She jumped off the wing and vanished. So Jackie is not only our most popular, but apparently our most powerful spirit, because she is the only one who has been spotted off the ship. So folks, you want to take a peek? You want to take a picture? Go ahead. And I'll meet you at the door.
Yeah.
Guests tell me there were shadow people in the room. So they woke up to the doors and dresser drawers opening and closing by themselves. Some of our hotel guests claim they've seen the Lady in White in other first-class areas, not just the lobby. Some people believe they've seen her dancing in the Queen's Salon. A couple of guests told me they had a drink with her in the observation bar. I don't know how many drinks they had before she joined them, but that's what they claimed. In 2017, one of our security guards, Gary, was running around telling anyone who would listen he had just had his very first paranormal experience in the decades that he had worked here. He said he was doing his morning rounds, so it was 6, maybe 7 a.m. He was walking through one of the kitchens, and this big cart of trays rolled out in front of him. He wanted to yell at somebody, "Hey, that's not safe." There was nobody else in the kitchen. The cart turned to the left and continued to roll uphill, made a right and a left around a corner, and came to a stop on its own. Gary is now highly suspicious of every cart on board the ship. And believe it or not, folks, I'm not here to convince you that the ship is haunted. I would much rather let people go exploring and then tell me if you think the ship is haunted. We're on our deck. To get back up to the promenade deck for the restaurant, the gift shop, the tour center, you can walk up the first class stairs, 4 decks. You can take the outside elevator up to level 4. If you're feeling adventurous, take the ship's original elevators up to P for promenade. If you are not doing the steam and steel tour today and you want to check out the engine room on your own, you go up the stairs out here to your left, across that giant bridge to the back of the ship. If you need directions any place specific, if you have questions, hang out, we can chat for a minute. Other than that, if you enjoyed our time together, if you hated this tour, I'm Bob Hope. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Mhm.